Anyway, as I might have mentioned, my name is Eric, the IT guy, and if that sounds familiar, it's because I've guest hosted on the Ask Noah show and Linux Unplugged from time to time. And Tyler invited me out here today to talk about an open source project called Peertube. And if GNOME will cooperate, we'll get on with the presentation. Okay, so what is Peertube? I think a better question to ask are, what are some of the problems that people that are recording, people that are producing content face? What are some of the problems out there that we have nowadays? So the first use case I can think of is if you're a podcaster or a video blogger. Basically, you've got a small setup in your basement and you record a channel on YouTube. One of the problems with YouTube in particular, and then some of the other monetized platforms, is that especially in Google's situation, AI is in charge of content filtering. So there's algorithms and there's things that Google's. If there's any Google fans in the room, I apologize. I might beat down on them fairly hard. So I'm not their biggest fan, and I'll go on record saying that. A lot of times, and we've seen this with Jupiter Broadcasting, and I think Blender was another open source project that got hit hard by this, where their content was demonetized, meaning they're not going to make any money off of ads or anything because their content was flagged for copyright violations. And in at least one of these instances, it was a copyright violation based on their own content. So they played back a clip from one of their own episodes and got flagged for it. So that's kind of a problem if that's a part of your income. And then another thing I can think of is video performance. So the more popular your video gets, the more people that are watching it at any one time, and usually you see a degradation in either quality or in performance. There's another use case I can think of, and that's be it a small organization or someone just getting started in podcasting or video content, or maybe even a family that just wants to have a platform in which they can share their family photos or their family videos. And then with tools like Google, they're well known for collecting every shred of data that they can on you and then using that to sell you products, or more specifically, use that to sell you ads. That a company tries to sell you products through. And then the timing of this particular presentation was pretty fortuitous, because Google, again, not to continue to smack down on Google, but they just decided to decommission the consumer version of Google+. So now anyone that had a family circle or a circle of friends on Google+, well, sorry, Google doesn't think it's worth their time and effort anymore, so they're shutting it down. So, since a lot of you all work in open source and work on open source platforms like the Linux desktop, I'm sure you can understand the need to, as technologists, to do it yourself, to DIY. So, I can probably guess that most people in this room run their own media server. I'm sure several people run their own C-File or Nextcloud instance to host their own files, so you're not paying a company like Dropbox or iCloud or anybody else money to host your own files, just so you can have it synced between devices. And some of you may be crazy enough, like myself, to start to work on home automation that you build yourself, instead of just installing Hue lights and throwing their wireless adapter onto your router. You want more fine control. You want to know what it's doing. You want to know how it works. So Peertube, to start out this, I mentioned Peertube to start out this talk. I need a clicker. There we go. So Peertube is a solution to the two use cases I started this talk out with. Peertube is an open sourced peer-to-peer video sharing platform. Peertube is, think YouTube meets Mastodon meets torrent. So on the back end, it's torrents. Anytime you watch a video on a Peertube instance, and I'll mention a couple here as this talk goes on, but anytime you access a video over a Peertube instance, what you see is that you're actually seeding that video. So the more popular your video gets, the more quality you see, the more performant that video actually becomes. Granted, you can't get past the transcoding, so if it's 1080p, sorry, you're not getting 4K over torrent. But when we start to consider torrent as a back end, you can start to see how 4K streaming becomes more accessible. Because if you have a show that goes live and you have 100 people that immediately watch that show, you have 100 different sources for that content. So I mentioned it was torrent on the back end. It's federated, so some of you may be familiar with Mastodon, or I think Office 365 calls it Teams. A few eye rolls there.
Nextcloud also allows for federation.
Nextcloud is federated as well. That's a great point. So what this is you can set up your own instance, your own community, and only invite certain people, or have specific rule sets for specific groups of users. So you can have admins that can upload and download and moderate comments, and then you can have users that can only upload, and you can set caps on how many megs or how many gigs that those people can actually upload. So it's torrent technology on the back end. It's federated in the middleware, and then on the front end, it's a very slim, very streamlined web interface that anybody who's used YouTube or Vimeo or any of those others for any length of time would feel pretty at home at. So the Peertube project was actually started almost 3 years ago in 2015. In fact, just about a week ago, or beginning of this week, version 1.0.1 was just released, so it's their first official release. There's been over 2,700 commits by 91 different contributors, and Peertube really came into their own just this past summer when they started a crowdfunder and surpassed over $60,000 US in support. So clearly, the best way in open source to get a project supported is to vote with your wallet. Open source is usually free, it's accessible, so these people have to make money somehow. And so if we're voting with our wallet instead of paying for YouTube Red, if we go out and support someone like Peertube, we can have a good platform that we can support ourselves, that we can install ourselves, or we can join an existing instance and share our content with. So a couple of instances to go and check out, a shameless plug. And actually what got Tyler and I talking about this subject is getjupiter.com. That is Jupiter Broadcasting's official Peertube instance. We set that up back in June, I believe, and it started out as a DigitalOcean droplet, and then we've, for the past few months, actually been donated a very, very beefy virtual machine from a couple of folks who work for HP Labs. So they work for Hewlett Packard and in their R&D department, and they're big fans of the network. So they donated a couple of VMs for our use. So if you've spent any time with YouTube, the menu is very straightforward. Now that I think of it, I should have put in a slide for the admin panel. You can create channels, you can subscribe, you can leave comments, you can upvote and downvote, just like you could on some of the big players like Vimeo and like YouTube. Another one, if you're like me and you're just getting started in the community and you want to record some content, you want to upload it somewhere where people can find you, just so you have somewhere to share that content. I actually have a couple of lighting videos and a couple of talks about open source on an instance called peertube.linuxrocks.online. So if you're a user of Mastodon, it's a federated open source social media platform. There's linuxrocks.online. So as a companion application to that, there's a few of us that set up peertube.linuxrocks.online. It's community driven, so there's a bunch of us who have content out there, and some people just use it to share random videos that they find online and funny and want to keep track of, and others are using it to start podcasting or start speaking at conferences or at local user groups, something along those lines. You can also go out to their website, joinpeertube.org, and click on the instances link, or as I mentioned, you can host your own. One caveat about hosting your own: this Peertube is not exactly very resource friendly in the initial upload process, because what it'll do it will upload your video from either an RSS feed or manually off of your device, and it will immediately start a single threaded transcode job, and it'll do one at a time, and it'll transcode out to every conceived resolution. So you've got 1080p, 720p, 420p, and I think 120, something along those lines. You can. One of the nice things though is that once you're into a routine, it's not that bad. I manually upload Jupiter Broadcasting shows, so if you follow JB, you'll see the tweets go out, and usually within a couple of hours, or depending on how buried in work I am, usually that evening. Usually within about 20 to 30 minutes, those videos are then available on Peertube. We've got a cron job that we're currently troubleshooting, so hopefully in the next week that's automated and I don't have to jack with that anymore. So if you are going to host your own, something I will suggest is get something with high CPU and tons of storage. But it's actually a very light application when it's just running, because a lot of the transcoding job, I'll snag your question here in a minute. So one of the nice things is when it's just up and running, it's basically a web server. Because if you get more than 2 people watching any video, all that stream is coming over torrent instead of from the application itself. So other than adding new content, it really is a pretty lightweight application. There's currently Peertube server support for Linux, FreeBSD, macOS, and in Docker containers. And just because I tend to work in enterprises, I'm going to see if I can't expand that out to support Kubernetes. So we'll just get all the cloud terms out here. It's fairly easy to get set up. It's PostgreSQL database on the back end. It uses NPM and Nginx as a proxy, and their documentation is great. And I think the only thing better than their documentation is actually their community. I believe they've got a channel out on GeekShed, and if you open up an issue on their GitHub page, I see a couple of people immediately going to Quassel and tracking that down. I think it's on GeekShed, and I think it's pound Peertube.
GeekShed or Freenode?
Actually, I think it's Freenode.
I was like,
it's probably
Freenode.
Freenode.
Weird for it to be on GeekShed.
Yeah. It's probably Freenode. Freenode pound Peertube. I actually should have tracked that down. So, like I said, the only thing greater than their documentation, I think, is their community. For Jupiter Broadcasting, we've actually submitted a couple of feature requests and a couple of bugs, and within a few weeks, we've had those resolved. In fact, we're working on we're working to get prioritization implemented. So if you're a big company like Jupiter Broadcasting, who has 10 plus years worth of content spanning thousands of hours, literally, it's going to take a while to get all that content digested. But every week there's about 6 or 7 new shows that come out, ranging from 20 minutes up to an hour 15. So you want that new stuff available. So anytime something new comes along, you want that at the front of the line. So if you're looking for an alternative, if you're trying to develop your own content, and you're sick of a series of complex algorithms just determining whether or not your content is safe for certain audiences, or you're tired of getting demonetized, Peertube would be an amazing alternative, and even supports. It's just links right now, but there is a support section. So for every video, you can provide a link to your Peertube or your Ethereum wallet, or whatever the case may be, because we all hate Bitcoin nowadays. Come on. So I'll talk a little bit more about who I am, how I came here in just a minute, but I had to get a meme in here. So thank you guys for the invite, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. I think you had one.
It might be a stupid question, but
There are no stupid questions.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Except for, I think a Dilbert cartoon might have proved
so
me
you said
wrong.
it does just one instance of encoding, so it kind of files them out one at a time. You know if that favors like multi-core or higher speed?
We have seen better performance with more cores. I don't think it's necessarily the speed of the cores. I think it's more having more cores to work on is what gave us that performance improvement. That's also something that's being worked on. I don't have a timeline for that, but hopefully in the near future that gets worked out.